The last 2 months have been incredible for fans of Japanese games, and with the release of Nioh, the trinity of highly anticipated, long-in-development games is now complete. As with Final Fantasy XV and The Last Guardian, Nioh was first announced more than 10 years ago, and just like those aforementioned games, it has underwent a significant transformation. Simply put, this is Team Ninja's return to form. A dark, brutally difficult action game which combines the best elements of Ninja Gaiden and Dark Souls into one remarkable package. And to think, it didn't even start out as a Team Ninja game in the first place. Now, Team Ninja's games have traditionally focused on sleek, polished visuals, a fast frame rate, and fluid animation. But Nioh takes things further by offering players a selection of options to help tailor your experience. Today we're going to focus on what Nioh has to offer visually, as well as how it looks and runs on the PS4 and PS4 Pro. So without further ado, let's get started. On the face of it, Nioh is a visually conservative game, one which leaves modern post-processing effects on the sidelines in favor of a crisp, detailed presentation. Taking a page from the likes of Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne, Nioh focuses on creating surface detail through sheer brute force, rather than relying on techniques such as parallax occlusion mapping. Large rocky surfaces are carefully modeled and help give Nioh a sense of depth that is easy to appreciate. Atmosphere is further enhanced by lighting and weather techniques. The rain-swept village glistens as specular highlights fill the scene. The rain appears to use a screen space technique to appropriately take on the properties of nearby lanterns as well. And of course, puddles of water also make use of screen space reflections in many scenes. The texture work itself is also reasonably detailed throughout, with crisp surfaces that appropriately convey the detail intended. Character models, of course, are of excellent quality here, with a sufficient polygon budget that feels like an obvious step forward from the stylistic choices we've seen in previous Team Ninja games. Now, some aspects of the visuals can look a little plain at times, but overall I think it works quite well, and the game has very richly detailed environments that are interesting and fun to explore, which is key in a game like this. Unfortunately, the reality is there isn't a lot of information available on the technology powering Nioh, but it certainly seems likely that it's based upon previous work from the studio, as it does share some similarities. One immediate similarity stems from its reliance on adaptive resolution scaling, but before we get into the actual numbers there, we need to consider this. Nioh offers players a choice between 3 gameplay modes: Action Mode, Movie Mode, and a Variable Movie Mode. Action Mode focuses on delivering 60 frames per second. Movie Mode is instead capped at 30 frames per second with a priority on resolution, while the Variable Mode tries to find a middle ground. All 3 options are available on both PS4 and the PS4 Pro. So on the Pro then, the adaptive resolution feature plays a very significant role, and after pixel counting a huge number of shots, we came across a wide variation in resolution. When using the Action Mode then, we ran across a number of different resolutions, including, of course, a full 1080p, 1728 by 972, 1665 by 940, 1472 by 828, and even 1280 by 720 in rare instances. Switching over to the Movie Mode then, we see variation ranging from a full 2160p to 1800p down to 1440p. And when using the Variable Movie Mode, which operates with an uncapped frame rate, we actually count it all the way down to 2304 by 1296 or so. Over on the base PS4 then, we see the Action Mode employ the same technique, but with generally reduced resolution. The game spends a lot of time at 720p, but it can actually jump up to higher resolutions, such as 1728 by 972. The average image quality, though, is much lower than what we see on PS4 Pro. Movie Mode then basically locks to 1080p at 30 FPS. Which of course brings us to our big question then, performance. Let's start here on the PS4 Pro with the Action Mode option selected. Team Ninja games have a rich history of focusing on 60 frames per second, From Dead or Alive to Ninja Gaiden and even Metroid Other M, its games are all about that high frame rate, and as you can see here, that's precisely what Nioh aims to provide for gamers. Indeed, the frame rate in action mode is, for the most part, extremely stable. Buttery smooth 60 FPS goodness through and through, which is important here as the game itself is both extremely punishing and very fast paced. This feels like the best way to play the game simply because the response is so much faster all around. Now again, it's not 100% locked, and there are some situations which can dip. But truthfully, it gets pretty darn close to hitting and maintaining its target, which is key to a very good experience here. Between the two consoles and the 3 different modes available, I have to say that action mode on the PS4 Pro is absolutely my preferred way to play the game. But of course, the development team offers players options, and I feel that should also be commended. Enter the movie mode. Image quality is indeed greatly improved, and while things aren't entirely clean due to the type of post-process anti-aliasing in play here, it is ultimately a lot sharper than action mode, especially when it reaches all the way to native 4K. Unfortunately, this mode isn't quite what I had hoped for either. First and foremost, there is slowdown as you can see, but the drops are actually pretty minor really. It just feels a little rough when you're used to the other mode, which is basically a locked 60 frames per second. But the real thing here is a kind of judder that is present in the game. This isn't even picked up by the frame rate graph or the frame time graph due to the way it manifests. Frame persistence is still correct, and there's not really slowdown happening, but there is often a jerkiness to the 30 FPS mode that I found quite bothersome. It feels as if the frame rate is lurching around even when the measured frame rate is actually stable. It's a very strange thing indeed. Fortunately, most people aren't using cybernetically enhanced eyeballs, so it shouldn't be a huge problem, but I thought it was worth noting. Were you able to notice it? So what about the variable mode then? To find out, here's a nice 3-way graph to give you a better idea of how it stacks up. Here we see that the frame rate cap is removed, but higher resolutions are supported. The threshold for adjusting the resolution then must be modified to favor the higher res while staying above 30 FPS, I suppose. This mode tends to spend more time in the 1440p to 1296p range in comparison to normal movie mode, and here the frame rate judder is actually far more distracting. Nioh does not handle inconsistent frame rates well, and the game winds up feeling incredibly jerky in this mode. This is clearly not designed for someone like me, but again, it's great that Team Ninja opted to give users a choice here. If you prefer unlocked frame rates and you want that higher quality image, then it should get the job done. Just don't expect fluidity here. Okay, so we see how the Pro handles Nioh, but what about users of the regular PlayStation 4? After all, that's likely how more players are going to experience the game, right? Well, in action mode we actually see performance very similar to the Pro. It aims for 60 frames per second and it gets there the overwhelming majority of the time. We noticed a few more duplicate frames popping up here and there during normal play, but it generally feels quite good. When the effects work is increased, however, we do start to see some drops. This 3-way comparison here shows the difference quite well, with minor dips happening on the PS4 on the action side. Again, nothing too serious, but not completely stable either. In comparison, if we move on over and take a look at that same scene running on the PS4 Pro, we see that it's running beautifully. Those small dips over on the base PS4, again, aren't a huge deal, but keep in mind that the scene is being rendered at 720p there. But as an aside, let me remind you of this. The very first demo of Nioh released, less than a year ago. This early alpha build of the game is running action mode here on a base PS4, and of course it's also at 720p. And, well, as you can see, the frame rate is well below the desired 60 frames per second. Now at this point the game still had a long way to go in development, but I'm thrilled to see that the team has made absolutely monumental strides between then and now. The final game is significantly more polished all around, and it runs exactly as you would have hoped. Well done, Team Ninja. Then we have the movie mode, and on a base PS4 you get 1080p resolution with a 30 frames per second cap, and it's pretty similar to the Pro's higher resolution mode in terms of performance. The same can be said of the uncapped frame rate option, which maintains a higher resolution but removes the cap, and just as on the Pro, this mode doesn't feel especially good. While thinking about fluidity, one strange thing I wanted to point out was this. Look at the animation of these troopers. Now, normally everything moves and animates at 60 frames per second, right? Well, I've noticed that when the battlefield is full of enemies, we start to see some of them, especially those in the back, animate at lower frame rates. It's something similar to what we saw back in Halo 5 actually, but unlike Halo, it doesn't have anything to do with the distance from the camera per se. It's simply based on how many enemies are on screen at once, at least based on my experience. Now, during normal gameplay, this is not the kind of situation you're going to want to find yourself in very often, so it doesn't really crop up regularly, but it sure is interesting. Ultimately, it's great to give users options like this. The game does default to action mode, which I believe makes for a better playing experience all around, but those that prefer sacrificing performance for image quality are also well taken care of here. I also feel that while PS4 Pro and PS4 owners both receive a fantastic experience with the game, this is definitely one where the Pro really comes out on top. In action mode, the frame rate is more stable overall, and the resolution is very often at or near 1080p. And yes, I know, dropping below 1080p doesn't sound great for a Pro game, but you have to remember that it's mostly 720p on a base PS4, and let's be honest, drops in resolution are hugely preferable to drops in frame rate. This is exactly how it should be done. Of course, there is one other very important aspect that I need to touch on here, and that is the load times. You will die in Nioh, and you will die a lot. Well, unless you're just insanely good, of course. The time between dying and being revived at the nearest shrine then is ridiculously short for a game like this, which helps alleviate one of the most serious issues I've had with titles such as Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3 on consoles. These quick loading times really help push you to keep trying to conquer a difficult boss or section of a level. It's very well done. And really, it all just ties into how solid of a package this really is. Nioh is a beautifully crafted game all around. All of those alpha tests where the developers listen to user feedback have certainly paid off in a big way, and the end result is a very well made game. I cannot recommend it enough. If you're looking for a challenge, of course. Having finished every Dark Souls game, aside from 2, and Bloodborne, I found that Nioh is actually an even more demanding experience all around, and I love it. Anyways, that's all I have for now. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give us a like, subscribe, and follow us on Twitter. And until next time, this is John, signing off.